Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, not in Shenzhen, China, but on the Normandy. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland, not in Shenzhen, China, but on the Normandy coast in France for summer vacation. And I am so happy to and truly honored to have Douglas Valentine on the show today. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm not doing too bad. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well,
nothing to brag about.
I would like to
70, you know.
I would like to thank Dr. T.P. Wilkerson, whom I recently interviewed. He's the one that put us in touch, so that was very nice of him. So I do want to point out, Doug wanted. Can I call you Doug? Can I call you Doug?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I do want to point. Doug asked me to tell the audience out there that he is hearing impaired, and he may have to ask me to repeat a question or repeat something I said. So that is fully understood. Let me go ahead and tell you about Doug. He is the author of 5 works of nonfiction: The CIA is Organized Crime, The Strength of the Pack, then The Strength of the Wolf, The Phoenix Program, and The Hotel Taliban. And he wrote a novel called TDY, a book of poems. I mean, this guy is a Renaissance man. A Crow's Dream, and he is also editor of the poetry anthology With Our Eyes Wide Open, Poems of the New American Century. I'm envious, Doug. You're quite a writer.
Excuse me?
I said you're quite a writer. I'm envious of all that you have written.
Yeah. Well, I've been plugging away, you know, and I actually started out wanting to write poetry, but it's very hard to make a living writing poetry, you know. So I had to work at prose for many years before I felt comfortable, you know, trying to go at the poetry.
There you go. Well, I bought and read Doug's latest book. It's entitled The CIA is Organized Crime, which will be the focus of our discussion today. A number of his previous interviews cover this book in detail and are available on his website. And if you don't get past SoundCloud and iTunes and YouTube, it is www.douglasvalentine.com. I will include all his contact and book information on China Rising Radio Sinoland, so you can follow up. Thus, for today's talk, I'd like to take a different tack by asking Doug questions, you know, about the forest, you know, some more general, maybe philosophical questions instead of just the trees. Doug, do you mind if I just kind of sum up your books before we start the interview, so people can kind of get an idea of where we're coming from?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay. Well, to sum up, Doug's book, The CIA is Organized Crime, is outside of anti-imperial and or socialist countries. The Earth's peoples live in what I call a plasticine simulacrum of fake democracy and government/corporate controlled propaganda. The CIA has since 1947, with almost limitless black funds from the sale of heroin, cocaine, and weapons, effectively taken control of local, state, and federal law and drug enforcement, judicial courts at all levels, the military, the White House, Congress, and executive departments such as state, justice, treasury, homeland security, etc., not to mention maintaining an Orwellian grip on all the important global media, such as TV, newspapers, magazines, Hollywood, and the Internet. And all this is detailed in gripping research in Doug's book. The CIA runs secret armies and parallel governments in most of the world's non-socialist countries, bribing, corrupting, blackmailing, extorting, assassinating, and sabotaging supposed allies into servile submission, while working tirelessly to destroy any country that is not a whore for Wall Street and global capitalism, especially if they have exploitable natural and human resources. Look no further than China, North Korea, Russia, Venezuela, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and elsewhere across the planet. And so for all the fans of China Rising Radio Sinoland, I really highly recommend that you read Doug's masterpiece. It is available in ebook and print format on his website for as little as $20. And if you don't have the money, ask your local library or school to order it. Because until you absorb all that he has researched and reported, you really are living the big lie. And the only way we can have an impact and try to affect positive change for you and the rest of humanity out there is by knowing what the hell is really happening under the daily veneer. And Doug's book is the place to start. So bravo, Doug, for a wonderful book. You did a great job.
Thanks.
Listen, let's get to the first question. While reading The CIA is Organized Crime with my jaw dropping to the floor, I kept asking myself, how did you get it published? Why didn't the CIA come down on Clarity Press, the publisher, with all their weapons of terror and stop its release?
Well, the publisher, Diana Collier at Clarity Publishing, had been after me for years to write this book. And I never wanted to do it. It's kind of a compendium of a lot of interviews and articles that I had already done. And I wanted to just focus on my poetry and stuff like that. But she kept hammering away at me. And then finally she said she would go ahead and select all the articles on her own and all the interviews and put it all together. And all I would have to do is update them, because a lot of them are 20 years old.
Yeah, I noticed that.
A lot had changed over the period of time from when I wrote a lot of these articles and excerpts from my books and stuff like that. So I spent a year then updating all the articles and trying to put them into a contemporary context, and also to try and make it understood how I came to understand the things that I, sort of behind the scenes, things that, my books were expository. And so I gave it, without using much of a personal pronoun in them or talking about me. And people wanted to know how I came to understand the CIA and how I gathered all that information. So at Diana's request, I included all that in the process of updating all those old interviews and articles and stuff. Why the CIA has never killed me, I don't know. I got the feeling they wanted to see what I had to say. That they were just as interested to read the book, which, I'm not a famous writer. I don't have 10,000 followers on Twitter or, thousands of followers on Facebook. My work is pretty marginal. The CIA and its friends made sure that I would be marginalized. So I don't think they really care that much about what I write, because I don't think that they think it's going to reach a wide enough audience to make a big enough difference to actually, change society or change the way lots and lots of people think about them and the state of affairs that we're in right now. So, I kind of exist in to a large extent, marginalized. So I think that they fully understand that, the CIA, and I'm kind of like a cult figure or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not worth their time and effort.
Yeah.
Although they have certainly gone out of their way to harass me and marginalize my work.
Huh, okay. I was wondering, psychologists say that psychopaths love to leave clues about their crimes and revel and still not getting caught. Do you think that there may be something to do? I mean, just that they love the fact that you can come out with a book that just really, really exposes the dark underbelly of the Western deep state, and yet they can still get away with it. Do you think there's maybe something to that?
Well, yeah, like I said, I think they were interested in seeing what I had to say about all this. I think that, in a sense, me being a person who has a take on the CIA that not many other people have, and it's an accurate assessment of the CIA. I think that they're very, and because I quote so many CIA officers, your audience should be aware that I interviewed hundreds of CIA officers, which has not been done before or since. And so I came to an understanding of the CIA based on my, interviews of these CIA officers. And I think that they're an example of what you just said, of people who want to be known and want to be recognized, but they're in a secret service. So when they had a chance to talk to me, they all jumped at the chance because they do want to be recognized. They did not want to be recognized in the detail that I provided about them. They thought that I was going to stick to the script and present them as heroes, rather than in the unfiltered, unplugged way that I did it, and in a context that was insidiously critical of what they do. And so they weren't expecting that, and so they were all very mad at me for doing that in the Phoenix program and in all my subsequent books. But at the same time, they had nobody to blame but themselves for talking to me.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was a bit of an exception, and I think that really there's probably some group at CIA Central that kind of looks at my work and examines it and takes it seriously, because it presents the CIA in a brutally honest fashion that nobody else does. So I think I'm kind of an experiment to them.
Well, okay.
In some bizarre psychological way.
Well, I'm glad you're so marginal that they haven't gotten their revenge with extreme prejudice. So I'm glad to hear that. Listen, and it's true. I will just tell everybody out there, you've got to read Doug's book. It's such a revelation. It's, in a sense, it's a little bit, well, I wouldn't say depressing, but distressing, just because, you realize the extent at which, West lives in a simulacrum, and really in a fake reality. But we all really need to be aware of that, and Doug really did it in spades. Well, listen, let's talk about President Trump. When he got into the White House, I thought it must have been a fluke. He simply cheated more than Clinton, or she didn't cheat enough. I originally believed he was a mistake, and the deep state was regretting him getting in, since Hillary is, as you pointed out, is the ultimate imperial insider among what you call the, quote, protected ones, which I like a lot. But now the more I see, I think the CIA/military/Wall Street mafia put him in office because the post-war Bretton Woods dictatorship is no longer working, and too much of the world's human and natural resources are outside the control of global capitalism. Russia, China, Iran, and Venezuela for starters. That being the case, Trump seems to be their man to create chaos, confusion, uncertainty, all in the hopes that enemies and allies alike will slip up and make mistakes that can be exploited. So, Doug, what do you think? Is Trump the Make America Great Again outsider he claims to be? Or is he the bomb-throwing rogue thug the elites always wanted, realizing that he will surely be in the White House until 2024?
Well, I can't say with any certainty what the answer to that question is. To me, it looked like, I was mesmerized by Trump just like everybody else was, starting when he virtually castrated in public all the Republicans he was running against. He just emasculated all of them and said, he said, I've been pulling the strings on all these guys for years, and I've given them money and they do things I want them to do, and he kind of destroyed the Republican Party, and he seemed to be, very subversive, and he was subverting not just the Republican Party, the individuals in the Republican Party. He was saying that he was criticizing Bush for the Iraq War, which nobody had done before. He was criticizing John McCain, who was a military hero. So he was breaking lots of rules and sacred taboos left and right. And at the same time, he's a freewheeling capitalist. He's the epitome of a gangster capitalist. Yeah. So he represents the nativism of streak in the United States, which is the isolationist streak in America, which has been there, since the beginning. But at the same time, he's a freewheeling capitalist who wants to do business overseas. So he has this broad appeal across the board. And so I think that while he's an anomaly for attacking things which are taboo, at the same time, his overarching appeal to the ruling classes is that he's a freewheeling capitalist, and the first thing he did was lower all their income taxes, all the taxes.
Again.
So in a stroke, he gained the support of all these people because he gave them billions of dollars, and he continued, even though he has this nativist appeal. At the same time, he's widening the income inequality in the United States. He's strengthening the rich political elite and their ability to control American society and its American politics. So I think that after the initial shock of Trump winning the election with the help of a foreign adversary, that the capitalist class is perfectly happy with him, and at the same time, he's a custodian of the American military. And even though he speaks out against fake news and the deep state, the second thing he did was to increase the military budget and to strengthen the military. So despite his attacking taboos, he's done nothing but strengthen the military industrial establishment, to strengthen its presence around the world and its ability to conduct imperial adventures around the world. So I think that when you're talking about Trump, you have to be really careful, and you have to always distinguish what he says from what he does. And if you look at the tax cuts and the increase in the military budget, he has done nothing to alienate the deep state or the capitalist class. He's been the best friend that they've had since Robert.
Well, that's well put.
You know, it's really just keep it simple with Trump and look at those two things.
Yeah.
Increasing the military budget and tax cuts for the rich, explain it all. Everything else is smoking.
Yeah. Entertainment.
Obviously, except for making a crisis out of immigration, which is like they say, red meat for his nativist base. But so he's he's covering all the bases.
Yeah, well, he's going to get reelected in a landslide. I don't care who the Democrats put up against him. He's going to win. And I think he'll win in an even bigger landslide than he did the first time. He's quite a politician. He's an amazing manipulator of the zeitgeist. You know, he's just brilliant.
He created an entirely new zeitgeist in the United States. You know, I mean, it's a world now that appears to be without pretensions, and yet at the same time, it's nothing but pretensions. You know, and everybody, including me and you and everybody else, is just reeling as we try to unravel this Gordian knot of logic and reality that Donald Trump has created. And as long as he's at the center of it, it's going to remain because he really is the epitome of a strong man whose the strength of his personality holds the whole spectacle together.
Yeah. That's for sure. And he's sort of the antithesis of Barack Obama. You know, Barack Obama's estranged old friend, Dr. Cornelius West, famously said that, quote, Obama was selected before he was elected. And in researching my second China trilogy book, I discovered that the former president was the perfect Manchurian CIA candidate. His Indonesian stepfather worked with the CIA to organize death squads to exterminate somewhere between 1 and 3 million leftists in that country back in the 60s. And his mother and grandmother worked in accounts payable at the Bank of Hawaii, the CIA's go-to bank to send money all over Asia. Not that it matters, but his mother did die of cancer in 1995, right before he began his ascent to power. Amazingly, after graduating from Columbia University, Obama worked for a CIA cover company called BIC, and it fully paid off all his student loans. It's just unbelievable. Around that time, Obama went on temporary duty in Afghanistan to see how the U.S. occupies that country. And then after he got elected, Obama was cited by two wealthy benefactors as saying the reason he could not promote his long list of lefty campaign promises was because he knew what happened to JFK. And as an aside, Nixon was also quoted as saying that he was resigning because, quote, I don't want to go out like Jack. And Obama has also been quoted as saying the CIA gets whatever it wants. So, Doug, what do you know about Obama? I mean, do presidential candidates sell their souls to Langley in order to run for office, or do they get the, quote, JFK, end of quote, lecture when they sit down their first time in the Oval Office? I mean, it just seems to me like U.S. presidents clearly seem to not be in full command of their administrations. Even Franklin Roosevelt, one of the U.S.'s most skillful and powerful presidents, lamented to a friend in a personal letter that he could not proverbially pass gas before checking with the big banksters. And Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt said the same thing. It seems all presidents who died in office or experienced an attempted assassination were anti-big banksters and or peacemakers. We can go back for sure to Andrew Jackson and his attack on the big banks in the 1830s. So have U.S. have U.S. presidents and Congress people been token leaders going back to 1776? Is it all just a mirage of democracy in action? You know, especially at the epitome of that would be Barack Obama. What do you think?
Well, I think you're pretty accurate in your assessment of Obama as having been, you know, like somebody who passed through all the initiation rites and was completely and fully indoctrinated and could on the one hand be a symbol of blacks having achieved some sort of equality in America, and thus, like Mitch McConnell said, repaying all the wages that were owed for slavery because that, you know, a black man had now become president, and at the same time advancing the interests of the ruling class and the American empire at the same time, and balancing those two things, you know, with a lot of charm and a certain blackness about him that lent him some sort of legitimacy. But I think that the problem is not so much everybody being a hack, you know, going back to 1776, although that's certainly one way to, you know, to look at it. You know, it's more, and this is something I tried to explain in that book, CIA's Organized Crime, is that all of us are pretty much prisoners of our own assumptions. And that's where the problem is. It's not so much that you know, the CIA didn't exist until right after World War II. So why were American people doing all the things that American people did prior to the CIA? You know, well, they believed the myths and the story that our founding fathers told them. You know, and our founding fathers were consummate propagandists. You know, you know, Thomas Jefferson could write a Declaration of Independence and say, all men are created equal, while at the same time owning slaves, and get away with it. You know, which is the kind of trick that Donald Trump is capable of pulling, or Obama is capable of pulling. You know, I mean, it's just, what is it that makes Americans believe as individuals the big lie about America, that it's a democracy and that it's a force for good, when really it's an imperial nation that wants to exploit working people and take all their money and the money of people around the world and funnel it into the hands of the rich ruling elite, which has been the state of existence in America since it was founded. And why do Americans go along with that? That's the question, not so much whether our leaders are beholden to the CIA, but why do we believe all these things that they tell us? And why do we get tricked and fooled over and over and over again? And that's, you know, like what I try to, it's a big, long, complicated answer, but that's what I try to explain in the CIA's Organized Crime. Once the CIA comes into existence, then certainly the controls are strengthened over society, and the controls, the control that the elite has over our elected representatives increases, because suddenly, if you want to be a congressperson or you want to be a president, you have to really, you have to agree not to reveal CIA secrets.
Yeah.
In order to get the foot in the door, you have to pretty much, like, you know, Trump has everybody sign a non-disclosure statement. Well, when you become a congressperson and you want to be in a committee and you want to hear CIA secrets, well, you have to sign an agreement saying that you'll never tell anybody, or else you can be put in prison. So there's really nobody in Congress who can legally tell what's going on, because the price that you have to pay to become a congressperson and be privy to CIA secrets or military secrets is to give up your right to tell the public about those secrets. Otherwise, you don't get into those positions. So the bureaucracies have established rules and regulations which really make it the grip that the ruling elite have on society. It becomes an iron grip, and there's no way to ever break through it. And at the same time, there's more and more propaganda reinforcing all the false assumptions we have about our country, and those have been, pretty much come into existence at the same time as the CIA, and have grown in proportion in their effectiveness for the ruling class as the CIA itself has expanded its operations around the world. So it's a big mess, and the only way, unfortunately, that people can get out of it is by individually challenging their own assumptions.
Yeah.
And so how do you make it clear to the average Joe, or the intellectual, or somebody who's spent just on making a lot of money, that's the way to go, the wrong way to think, and it's kind of impossible, so we're kind of stuck.
Well, that's what writers like you and I are trying to do, is to increase people's awareness about the way things really work. And even though it may not be what we want to hear, and it may shatter, and you talk a lot about myths and stories in your book. So it is hard for people to drop down their guard and be willing to accept, to admit that they live in a world that is very different than what it appears to.
It's the hardest thing in the world to do. It's like a Catholic saying one day, I'm not going to believe in Catholicism anymore. It's as hard as a Muslim saying, I'm not going to believe in Muhammad anymore. It's as hard as a Jew saying, all of us Jews are nuts for believing this crazy myth that was created, 4,000 years ago by Iron Age people, and it's time to leave all that stuff behind. That's how hard it is. It's as hard as people examining their core beliefs and changing them. That's how hard it is to understand what the CIA does and why we're enslaved by the rich ruling elite, and why we can't do anything about it is because we're all imprisoned by our own assumptions and the myths that we believe in, and we hold on to them, we cling to them, and are willing to fight and kill and die for them. And that makes us all very easily managed and directed by our leaders. And unless you can dispel yourself of all those things you've been taught all your life, and all the things the beliefs you hold most dear, there's no hope.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well, let's go back further in time, Doug. In your book, you mentioned that you studied Carl Jung's work, the famous Swiss psychiatrist, and I always cited author Andrei Vlecek, and where he said that he read that Jung said, after watching the cannibalism of 2 world wars in Europe, that, paraphrasing, we are truly pathological or psychopathic. I never was quite sure which one it was. It is not a happy quote, so I have never been able to find it in English, and of course it would have originally been in German. Do you recall Jung saying something along those lines when you read him?
Not exactly, but I understand what he's getting at. I don't remember him saying exactly that, but I do understand what he's saying, and I'll put it in, just to follow up what I was just saying. What is it that can compel in World War I millions of Frenchmen and Englishmen and Germans to clash and kill millions of each other for no discernible reason other than let's say, nationalism, okay? Why would human beings do that? Okay? There's nothing, obviously, more psychopathic than all these men from these three different countries, France, England, and Germany, and who are basically indistinguishable from each other. If you go back to their origins in the forests of Iron Age Europe, I mean, they're all exactly the same people. And then slowly they all start developing these identities based on their own particular culture and language that they cling to such great, with such fervor, with such psychopathic fervor, that they will go out and kill each other by the million. So what is it that makes people do this? What is the myth that each of these people believes in? Well, it's the myth that there's nothing more, no higher goal to attain in life than to be a soldier and to kill and die for your people. That is the psychopathic myth that's behind the mess that we're in today. It's the myth that our rulers teach us from the time we're little kids, that you're fighting and dying, killing for your country is the highest honor that any man can achieve. And we see it here in the United States all the time. On the 4th of July, Trump is going to roll out the tanks, and he's going to roll out the bombers that, drop bombs on people all around the world. And he's going to do everything he can to enhance and perpetuate this myth that killing and dying for your country is the greatest thing that you can do. And of course, it strikes a chord with all nativist Americans and also with all imperial Americans that this is the thing that makes America great, is that we are the superior force. We have the greatest military in the world. We're the dominators, and we dominate the world, and we get our way because we're the most ruthless and we're the most militaristic. So that is what is happening. And it's trying to get men, American men, to stop believing that their guns are going to make them American males, to stop making them believe that their guns are going to turn them into men. And that the only way that they can become men is to abuse people around the world, to abuse their wives, to abuse their children, to go off to war and abuse people in foreign countries, and then to come back and to expect that everybody's going to say, thank you for your service. You did a wonderful job bombing Dresden or Hanoi or Kosovo or Afghanistan or Iraq, and you're a wonderful man and you're a hero because you're a warrior hero and you bombed the hell out of all those poor countries overseas that never did anything to us. And until that myth, that particular myth of the warrior hero is driven from the hearts of American men and women, we're never going to advance anywhere, because that is the myth that our rulers use to dominate us.
Yeah, that's well put.
That's what Young meant when he said we're psychopaths.
Yeah, okay.
Because we believe that myth, and we go off and we kill, and we think that by killing and dying, that's going to make us real human beings, when exactly the opposite is true.
Yeah, that's very well put, Doug. It seems to me I keep, like you, I do a lot of reading, and it seems to me that, as you said, however Jung, said it, for me it goes all the way back to the Old Testament and the Torah, the Jewish Torah because they glorify and justify genocide and massacres of other peoples and the plunder of their lands and resources. And, the ancient Greeks, Abraham came from Mesopotamia. And the ancient Greeks adopted all this Mesopotamian. It's all racially justified, extermination. And it seems to me like it spread across Europe. And then I read a really good book by Robert A. Williams called Savage Anxieties, The Invention of Western Civilization. It's really, really good. And I also recall, Michael Parenti's lecture on Caesar when he talked about today's modern organized crime gangs being direct descendants of the Roman Senate, where clans bribed, blackmailed, extorted, and killed each other to divvy up the public and private spoils. And so as the more I read, it just seems like criminality seems to be embedded in Western governance and business. And I think maybe you mentioned in your book, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's An Indigenous People's History of the United States, and where she said that she thought that the Europeans really turned the Old Testament and Torah playbook into a science during the genocidal racist crusades. She went all the way back to the crusades with the concept of total war, burn all, steal all, kill all, which became the standard European, / at least today, Jewish American procedures from then on out, all across, Native Americans and Asia and Africa, et cetera. And it just, you said in as you said in your book, Westerners bomb and slaughter as many civilians as they possibly can for a reason, in order to terrorize the people into servile submission and plunder their resources. And recently I began to call it the 6 E's of Western racism: expansionism, extermination, expropriation, extraction, enslavement, and evangelism. So for me, after reading your book and putting all of these other books together and everything that you laid out, it just seems to me that the CIA is a very sophisticated, taxpayer-funded, 6 E's of Western racism money stealing machine. I mean, do you feel it's just sort of at the apex of the development of the Western model of corrupt governance? Your comments, please.
Well, there was a very insightful guy, a Frenchman, Guy Debord, who said that secrecy dominates this world, foremost as the secret of domination. In other words, when you think you're free, but you're really dominated, and when you think that you're a liberated person, but you're really actually believe and have a lot of false assumptions, how does that occur? Because it's not that your rulers it's not happening because rulers are telling you the truth about everything or revealing exactly what they do and why they do it. It's because they keep their methods of domination secret from people. People don't understand how it gets from what they believe to what they're made to believe. There's a lot of layers nowadays, especially of bureaucracy, in between those two things. There's, and certainly at the heart of it is the big lie that our government has both stated policies and unstated policies. And the stated policies are to bring peace to the world and democracy to countries around the world, and to do good and to advance the interests of human beings all around the world. Now, this stated policy is contradicted by the facts and details of what American militarism and imperialism do around the world. All you have to do is read about all the millions of people that have been killed since World War II. But the essential ingredient in being able to maintain this dichotomy between stated purpose stated policy and unstated policy is the CIA. And the CIA, as the covert organized crime branch of the United States, is what affects unstated policy, America's unstated policy. And they do it under a veil of absolute secrecy. And they've been doing it for 70 years. Now, in my book, I explain how that all happens. There's really not enough time to do it now. So, read the book if you want to see how it gets from point A to, from alpha to omega. But the thing to understand about the CIA and it being the organized crime branch and it conducting the unstated policies of the United States, which are, really brutal, just like you said, with those 6 E's in mind, is that after 70 years of existence, the CIA is now entrenched around the world. We're into several generations of the CIA perfecting its techniques, of broadening its techniques, of expanding all the illegal operations that it began 70 years ago and institutionalizing them in countries around the world. Just the same way that mafioso all want to go legit, and they want to funnel the money that they make by drug dealing and prostitution and all the other vices that the mafia exploits and profits from. They all want to, all the mafioso want to launder that money into legitimate corporations. They want to own old folks' homes. They want to own Ford franchises. They want to own, like Donald Trump, hotels and gambling casinos. Well, if you think of what the CIA has been doing since World War II, when it first started setting up proprietary companies around the world, right after World War II, the CIA did things like set up little tiny airlines that flew all around South America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, because it had at that time just a small budget. So a little airline that they might set up in Asia or Africa or Central America, South America 70 years ago is now a major airline. And it's legit. And it no longer has the fingerprints of the CIA on it. And yet, at the same time, it is controlled by the CIA. And when the CIA says to somebody in this airline, we want you to fly people we've kidnapped from one country to another country or to do this or to do that, they will do it. And it's the same for every area of business across the board that the CIA has set up proprietary publishing companies, proprietary magazines, proprietary this, proprietary that, banks, all these things are still in existence, but now they're more deeply rooted than ever before in the fact they're insidiously in the fabric of not just the United States, but the world. And that's the extent that after 70 years that the CIA controls the world. They have established all these connections throughout the world that are invisible to the rest of us, but are actually part of the infrastructure of countries around the world and are unknown to people in these foreign countries that they're actually controlled and manipulated by the CIA. And it's the same for the information that we receive. It's to the same extent controlled by the CIA and the big brains back in Langley and the Pentagon and the State Department, all of whom coordinate on maintaining this secret empire. And they all do it for the singular purpose of controlling social and political movements, not just in foreign countries, but in the United States, so that the rich, powerful elite can do exactly what they're doing under Donald Trump, which is to increase their grip, to increase their fortunes at the expense of poor people around the world.
Amazing. Well, another way to look at it, in my interview with James Bradley, he said the U.S. founders were fervent followers of the Aryan myth. And it is the belief of being a super race, that they were super race white warriors, always expanding west towards the sun, raping and exterminating into extinction all the subhuman races in their wake. And our ruling elites, to me, seem to be, they still are. And in your book, you wrote that Thomas Jefferson was a serial rapist, and these American colonizers fled Europe to maintain their slave economy, then marauding west and wiping out the natives. And you also wrote on several occasions in your book about the CIA being very racist. Please comment on how central white supremacy is to Western empire and global capitalism in general, and the CIA specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. It's impossible to really separate the economics from the racism. Okay, and it's all part of what we're trained to believe. Okay, and it goes back to this idea of domination and this capacity that people have to be psychopathic in their quest for domination. And of course, it's easiest to dominate people who don't look like you, and our leaders play upon that. Sort of what I guess people and anthropologists must would say as the instinct for survival. Mm-hmm. That if anybody doesn't look like you or they're not part of your tribe, they're an enemy, and for your own security, you have to wipe them out. And again, it's if you look at the discourse that goes on nowadays and how easy it was for Trump to demonize Muslims and to make them become, for a long time it was communists, and certainly it still is for Trump, to demonize communists, that they're godless and, they want to take away all your freedoms, and Muslims are, going to impose Sharia law on the United States if they're allowed to get control, and they're going to take away your beliefs and everything that you hold to be true. Pitting people against others who don't look like them is the surest way, to manipulate people and to make them believe that what they're doing is essential for their own survival. Yeah. It's the oldest method of propagandizing people and getting them to do things that are essentially murderous and psychopathic in nature, by making them so afraid of people who don't look like them or believe things that they believe in, that they have no recourse but to kill them. And again, it's done in the United States, pitting whites against blacks. It's part of the big lie that's spread by the rich political elite that control the media and get their, are able to get their message across, and it works. I'm sad to say that they make people afraid of people who don't look like them, and it works, and it really worked. It worked for Thomas Jefferson, and it worked for Donald Trump. And it's been the same. There's absolutely no difference. The big question is why do people fall for it?
Yeah, exactly.
And until people examine themselves and their prejudices and their assumptions, it won't. It'll always be
that. So where are we, Doug? George Orwell's, are we in, violent fascist police state in his book 1984, or Aldous Huxley's surreal, sort of chemical / media / consumer mind numbness and a brave new world, as posited by Neil Postman, which you mentioned him in your book, in his classic book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And then there was Sheldon Wolin, who kind of took a bit of a middle road with his excellent thesis called Democracy Incorporated, Managed Democracy and the Specter of Inverted Totalitarianism, which I really liked. And I recently sent you an article about how the CIA is now using artificial intelligence and algorithms to concoct game plans to overthrow perceived enemies, both at home and away. And so with all that you know about our elite's use of the Vietnam-era Phoenix program as an imperial playbook and its ongoing evolution, are we Orwell, Huxley, both, or are we moving from one to the other?
Yeah, we're F.K.E.D. There's no way out of it. And, you don't have to look too far to see what the problems are. The climate, the whole idea of capitalism is that there's perpetual growth and that people keep making money by investing in new industries and they keep increasing their wealth. And at the same time, all this industrialization and production relies on the devastation of our environment and the raping and pillaging of our environment for its natural resources. And so on the one, again, it's one of those dichotomies that is explained away by advertising slogans that are thrown around by politicians, that if you want to live as well as your parents did, or if you want to have, be able to send your kids to college, we have to keep, growing. There has to be all this capitalist growth. And and that climate change is a lie that's told by communists and Muslims and people who are trying to subvert us. And because people are so greedy and they want so much, especially Americans in America, if you don't have a house with 5 acres and able to water your lawn twice a day and take long hot showers and absolutely, and have 3 cars, SUVs, an Audi, a Harley Davidson in the garage and a tractor, and all these symbols of wealth and consumer success that damn the environment, man. I'm not going to give up my luxurious life. I'm not going to give up what I have to assure that people in Haiti or El Salvador are able to minimally survive. And people don't see, the Americans absolutely do not conceive the connection between their rampant overconsumption of energy and consumer products with the absolute devastation of other people around the world and the environment. And again, they're so highly propagandized that they're willing not only to wage war against people around the world and destroy their countries and their cultures because they're not like us, they're willing to destroy the world and the environment so that they can have 2 cars in their garage, so that they can live in a splendorous life. And no matter how much you tell them it ain't working and your kids and your grandkids are going to suffer for it, they just keep going along and doing it. So, that's the situation we're in, where people are so thoroughly brainwashed that they can't even begin to make some little kind of small sacrifice to save their own planet. They just keep going along, or they think that separating out the plastic from the paper from the organic waste is enough. They recycle and they think they're doing their part. They're doing their part. So yeah, I think we're doomed, and I think it's basically the greed and the idea that we should dominate the world because we're warrior heroes that we're therefore entitled to lead these luxurious lives, which is, basically behind it. And it's a colonial mentality that's been driven into us because basically it does provide us here in the United States with a better standard of living than people around the world. And it appeals to the absolute worst in people. And it's cloaked, again, with the big lie that we're the heroes and we're saving the world. And it's a very convenient myth for people to believe because it allows them to live these luxurious lives.
Well, sitting here in northern France, I can tell you that it's only marginally better in Europe. I mean, they're just basically an extent. It's the whole Western civilization. Yeah, it's not just the United States. I wanted to ask you, and I hope you don't mind if I do, but in the early parts of your book, you seem to be sitting on the fence about the West's use of false flags. But towards the end, you alluded that 9/11 might have been an inside job, and many journalists privately acknowledge that false flags are a reality, but are reluctant to admit it publicly for fear of not getting published or being branded as tinfoil hat nut jobs. And having done hundreds of hours of research from Nero burning down Rome to the USS Maine and Lusitania being sunk, JFK, RFK, actually, which you worked on the MLK case with William Pepper, onto the brilliant moon landing studio productions, to the Oklahoma City Federal Building, 9/11, Charlie Hebdo, Bataclan, Boston Marathon, and on and on. I have seen so much evidence that if not all, almost every public act of mass violence that happens in the West is inspired by our elites. And overseas, it's fake chemical attacks in Syria. And just in the last 2 weeks, oil freighters were buffoonishly attacked in the Persian Gulf, with the Western media immediately using them as a pretext to attack Iran. And at the same time, I'm very respectful of everybody, friends, family, and fellow writers who deny false flags, because I can sympathize with them since I was the same way until about 2010, and I was already pretty old by then. So where do you sit today concerning false flags? Do you think they are an ongoing instrument of elite rule or to maintain mass control, or are you not so sure?
Well, my whole book, The CIA as Organized Crime, is an explanation of false flags.
Well, maybe I didn't see it that way. Okay.
I mean, if you don't understand why you're subject to false flags, then false flags work.
That's for sure.
So what I'm trying, and I started out the whole book, that book, The CIA's Organized Crime, by trying to explain how, as an English lit major and a person who studied literary criticism, that I was always looking at the language that the government used. And I was taking apart how they create myths that we believe. And then how these myths become the basis for psychological warfare, which is the overall terminology within which a false flag occurs. A false flag is psychological warfare that the government wages against people. But you got to prepare the ground, and you prepare the ground for false flags and psychological warfare by propagandizing people to believe certain things altogether. Otherwise, the false flags don't work. And then I explained that, and I think I used the term psychological warfare about 600,000 times in my book. And then I explained about black propaganda, which I think is a term I used about 100,000 times in the book, and how black propaganda purports to be something that somebody else is doing when it's actually us doing it so that we can attack that person. So the terminology false flag is it's something that's become a buzzword, like deep state and fake news, which hadn't really surfaced until, a couple of years ago. But beneath those sort of that sort of popular jargon are these deeper subjects which people have to understand about mythology, psychological warfare, black propaganda before they can even begin to understand what a false flag operation actually is. The false flag is, I mean, I do talk about it. I do mention it in the book. Well, I'm certainly not avoiding it. And on the contrary, it's, what I'm trying to educate people to understand so that these sorts of things can be recognizable for what they are. I mean, you can teach people, you can lead people to water, but you can't make them drink. And if my book doesn't get across the messages that I'm trying to get to them, I mean, sure, maybe it's my fault not being clever enough, but from my point of view, the whole point of that book was to prepare people to understand what a false flag is. I could go down the list and I could, start enumerating them. But I figured it was more important to teach people how to recognize these things than to actually try to point out individual instances of it.
Well, I appreciate that because as you said, false flags is kind of a buzzword, and now I realize what you're saying is that when you were talking about black operations and psychological warfare, that is in fact a false flag, but it's just sort of a different. It's a different way of looking at it.
What is, if you don't understand covert operations and the role of secrecy in our society, then you're simply looking at these things and reacting to them. And you're not changing, the whole idea of a false flag. You may say, well, that's a false flag. Yeah, that's a false flag, but it hasn't done anything to change how you think and how you think about yourself and how you think about the government, which is really what I'm trying to get at, to make people change how they think. And, I mean, just by being able to identify what you think is a false flag does not start that chain of events.
You expanded my horizons now in this interview on false flags, so thank you. In your book, you totally expose, the CIA's management and profit from the international drug trade and illegal arms sales with the military plane sidekick. However, I don't recall, and if you did, I apologize. I don't recall you talking about human trafficking and money laundering in any detail. And in my interview with Joseph Assertier, he talked about a book covering human trafficking, and that it is driven in large, which shocked me. It was driven in large part to supply sex workers to hundreds of thousands of NATO soldiers stationed all over the world. And I also just read an interesting article about how the Vatican works hand in hand. You may have mentioned the Vatican with global organized crime and the CIA to launder their mountains of black money. So along with drugs and arms, does the CIA fit into the multi-billion-dollar human trafficking? And you did mention they have banks, money laundering empires. How do they fit into the human trafficking and money laundering?
Well, certainly, money laundering is the essential ingredient of the drug trade. You can't make a garage full of cash unless it doesn't do you a hell of a lot of good, unless you have a bank to wash it through, and I'm going to be talking about the sex trade in the next book, but, there's simply not enough room in any particular book to cover anything. But when I was talking at the beginning of this interview, I mentioned that, 70 years ago, the CIA set up banks.
Okay, you mentioned that.
Banks, now they're big banks, and that the CIA has been setting up banks as proprietary companies, since it started, and people, I think people are aware of some of them, BCCI, that how they all set up, in the Cape Islands and all that sort of stuff, and again, it's exactly what criminals do. They set up their own banks too, and very often the banks set up by criminals and the banks set up by the CIA are the same bank. You know, do the same exact things. Because the CIA recruits criminals in foreign countries to do its dirty deeds for them, you know, and it has this, you know, it's basically control of the underworld. So that includes the sex traffic, which, you know, certainly, especially in the age of internet porn, it serves the CIA's interest in terms of it being able to blackmail people that are engaged in the sex trafficking, and in particular in foreign countries, it serves the CIA's interest to support criminals who are involved in sex trafficking, specifically so that it can monitor where these enslaved women go, and to use them to blackmail politicians and industrialists in foreign countries. So you'll never hear about it, but that's how they get a grip on people. You know, so any kind of vice that is going on around the world, the CIA wants to be involved in and have a controlling interest in. So it can control political and social movements by blackmailing foreign you know, diplomats and industrialists, leaders, and have them do its bidding against the interests of countries. And of course, Donald Trump may be the personification of this. It's always been my theory, and based on a smattering of evidence, that Donald Trump actually laundered several $100 million of drug money that came out of that by the Russian Jewish mafia in the 1990s, and that the CIA, of course, knew that Trump was laundering this money through casinos and hotels that he owned, because he was cash strapped and he needed the money, which was provided by the bank, so that he could buy golf courses, so he could buy all sorts of hotels around the world and revive his bankrupt empire. And that at the time, the CIA watched all this happen and was perfectly happy to let it all happen, because it was able to then, at the other end, put in place in Russia the drug oligarchs who were behind this drug empire, and had them do their bidding, and, you know, after the Soviet Union broke up, as part of its control of organized crime in Russia, so that it could determine social and political events in Russia and in all the countries where this drug trafficking was happening. And this is how the CIA operates. And so that would mean, at this point, that the CIA could never do anything for Donald Trump without exposing its own hand in the drug money laundering that he was involved in. Now, this, again, let me emphasize, is a theory of mine, but it would also explain why the CIA can't do anything to harm Donald Trump, because in doing so, it necessarily expose its own control over the drug empire and drug laundering empire, and show how and expose how it uses these criminal operations to control political and social events in foreign countries.
I can't wait to read your next book, Doug.
So anyway, one more question, because I'm pooping out here.
Okay. You wrote in your book about, elite stranglehold on global media, with the CIA embedded in all major outlets and even owning media assets itself, not to mention a venture capital fund, which you mentioned. And a book came out a couple of years ago talking about 1,000 movies the authors showed were managed and or censored by the CIA. And at the same time, there are productions like the movies The Matrix and They Live and The Truman Story and the 50s, 60s TV show The Twilight Zone that clearly tell the story of Westerners living in a simulacrum, a fake reality being manipulated by powerful elites. Do you think these screenwriters were trying to sincerely warn us about the truth, or are themes like these just a cynical way for the CIA to remind us that they can do whatever they want and that we are powerless to do anything about it, just like blowing JFK's brains all over Dealey Plaza instead of quietly killing him with an induced heart attack at home? What do you think?
Well, I think that generally speaking, it's still promoting the myth of the CIA as the warrior hero, defending America from its enemies. Even if in these shows that you're talking about, the CIA is shown to be doing dirty deeds, they're still doing them for America. And it reassures people that what they assume to be true is true. So it's a double lie. It assures people that this nefarious organization, the CIA, is actually looking out for their interests by doing things that are too horrible to tell. So it serves both purposes. It elevates the sort of terrible things that the CIA does. It elevates them to the realm of heroism, of protecting us. And of course, it's not protecting us. It's only protecting the rich industrial elite. So to me, all these things just further all the myths and the lies that we believe about ourselves and the world that we live in. You know, like you said, the simulated reality. So I think it's, you know, I think that the Hollywood writers are after fame and fortune, and they really don't care. and that if they had any interest in telling the truth, they would do so, but they don't. They're interested in telling a good story, and the good story is provided to them by the CIA, which is the ultimate psychological warfare force in the United States, and it does so secretly, and it just absolutely confirms all the false assumptions that we have.
Well, I know I appreciate this has been a fascinating interview, and I appreciate all the time you took to talk to us. Before we close out, you mentioned a book about that would include human trafficking. What are your current and future projects?
Well, that's
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's a part of the book. Yeah. I can't really tell too much about it right now, but I am working on a new book, and it has to do with the CIA, and it has to do with the things we believe, and it has to do with the underworld, the drug underworld, the criminal underworld. And it's trying to put it in a very down-to-earth, realistic way that hopefully will change how some people think about the world themselves.
Yeah. Well, listen, Doug, you have been extremely patient. It's been a wonderful, wonderful interview. I want to thank you so much for coming on China Rising Radio Sinoland. And in closing out, everybody go to www.douglasvalentine.com. Get his book, The CIA is Organized Crime, and learn how the world really works. Thank you so much, Doug, for being on the show.
You're very welcome.
All right. We'll stay in touch, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.